Dominion voting tabulators, and the option to vote by phone has left many of you asking me what the heck went on while votes were casted for BC's 43rd general election, and was it secure? I'm Drea Humphrey with Rebel News. Let's talk about it. By now, most of you know that British Columbia's nail-biting election was too close to call on election night, with David Eby's BC NDP party and John Rusted's Conservative Party of BC deadlocked with 40 seats each being called, and the NDP leading slightly in 6 more ridings, and the Conservatives having a slight lead in 5. The neck-and-neck figures mean that neither party has achieved the 47 seats needed to form a majority government, and that the Green Party, with its 2 elected seats, is currently holding the balance of power. Now, we await the final count, which is expected to conclude around October 28th, awaits the tally of an estimated 65,000 mail-in and absentee votes, which is a 16,000 uncounted ballot increase than what we were originally told to expect the day after election night. Election BC attributes this increase to further screening, which better clarified how many ballots were received by the deadline through various methods, including Canada Post facilities and voting locations. A mainstream research voter survey projected that Conservatives were more likely to vote by mail, which is interesting. And Elections BC has also confirmed they will be doing a hand recount of at least 2 key ridings that the NDP has a very slight lead in, including as slim as a difference of only 20 votes in the Juan Defuca Malaha riding. Needless to say, with such a suspensefully tight race, every vote mattered. And of course, so does the integrity and accuracy at which those votes were tallied. That's why I've taken a few days to do some digging into some of the tips and concerns many of you have, particularly when it comes to British Columbia's first-time use of Dominion tabulators for a provincial election and its repeat use of voting by phone. Unbeknownst to many, BC's assisted telephone voting became a thing back in 2017. And it's described in BC's Election Act as a vote where an election official marks a ballot on behalf of an individual in accordance with their will. And right here inside of this year's voting guide, citizens were informed that they could use assisted telephone voting for reasons like sight loss, disability, or a health condition that would make it unsafe or impossible to vote in person. Elections BC's website extended further in stating that eligibility also includes voters outside of the country or elsewhere in Canada that were unable to receive mail. But that's not the only people that took advantage of phone voting this year. As you may recall, BC's election day coincided with torrential rain, which caused floods and even an atmospheric river in some Metro Vancouver areas, which no doubt hindered the ability for some to get out and vote. But most were not negatively impacted, including many who cast their vote in person on October 19th, and also those who made it around Metro Vancouver smoothly, like myself and many others who gathered at various election night events. But whether it was a hindrance to them or not, how easy and secure was the phone voting process? I was able to witness a telephone vote for an individual whom I'll be keeping anonymous. For legal reasons, I wasn't able to film it for you. At first, he told the official on the phone he couldn't vote because he was at an event that he couldn't leave. The official told him that wasn't a valid reason. And get this, then offered another reason, the flooding. The man replied by stating that he had been affected by that, and voila! He was permitted to move forward to verify if he matched a registered voter by giving his name, address, and license number. Now, to be clear, in this case, I believe the caller was negatively impacted by the weather. The voter was then transferred to 2 other officials who didn't know the personal information he stated earlier. He was asked to make oral declarations that he wasn't able to vote due to an extraordinary circumstance and that he had also not already voted. Then he was asked to say which candidate or party he wanted to vote for, and the official repeated that name and described herself as marking that on the ballot. She then passed it to the other official, who repeated the name again. He confirmed, and that official said that they put that vote into the machine. And then, when the caller asked how many people have done these phone votes, that official said a lot. Quite the element of faith and integrity going on both sides of that conversation, isn't it? One, how do they actually know that the caller is who they claim to be and not just someone who happens to have access to another registered voter's information that perhaps they know won't be voting this time around? Two, how does the voter know with certainty, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that they are being told the truth about their card being marked correctly or that it wasn't swapped for another card on the way to its tabulator? Keep in mind that in both scenarios, being found guilty of providing false or misleading information in the election is punishable up to a $20,000 fine and up to 2 years imprisonment. But the big question remaining is how many phone votes were actually cast? That official says a lot. But after reaching out to BC elections myself and being told that the answers around 1,800 of the over 2 million votes that were cast and around 280 of the 1,800 being due to extraordinary circumstances, that total just doesn't seem to be enough to sway an election. I suppose if a significant bulk of the 1,800 were targeted on specific, very tight race ridings and were in fact fraudulent, it could certainly do some damage. But that seems highly unlikely and potentially easy to be picked up on. And I know what many of you are thinking now. But Drea, what about the Dominion machines? Because I was thinking the same thing too. The first thing I learned about this was that the Dominion voting system used in BC's election was not the same as the Dominion machines used and highly questioned during the Trump versus Biden election. Instead, BC used Dominion tabulators, in other words, ballot trackers, which are not connected to the internet. And according to the BC elections statement here to me, are tested before and after being used and while being observed by candidate and party representatives. In 2022, the state told British Columbians that tabulators would be used to ensure a more efficient, faster process the next time we voted in a provincial election, which, as we are now learning, really doesn't mean much when it comes to an election that's so close that we have to wait for the final count, which includes mail-in ballots and traditionally takes a while to do anyways. The state calls the allowance of such vote counting machines and a few other things, such as an electronic voting book to check voter information, the most significant changes to BC's voting processes in 25 years. And it appears that the decision to allow such amendments to be passed occurred a few years prior to that in 2019. And while I have yet to been able to track down exactly which MLAs were in favor of voting these amendments into occurrence, one thing's for certain, and that's that the BC NDP's leader, David Eby, who was the Attorney General at the time, oversaw it. So how do we trust that tabulators are in fact tallying votes accurately and without being tampered? In addition to what I already told you Elections BC stated to me, I reached out to Dominion. They responded by not answering any of my questions specifically and instead vaguely directing me to their Record Straight page on their website, which I'll link for you in the written article for this report, which you can find in the description box below. But who better to give us some additional insight on these tabulators than a healthy skeptic and family law attorney, Don Wilson with Atticus Legal, who, after having his own reservations of these machines, ended up having the opportunity to be a scrutineer and oversee how one of these tabulators were checked, due to him also being a campaign manager for one of the BC Conservative candidates.
So they tested the machines before any voting took place. It was basically a sort of an operational test, I would call it. I think they might have called it a security test, but it's basically a dozen ballots got put through the tabulators so that they could verify that they were operating in the manner that they expected. And then afterwards, they did that again with all of the machines. And they also did a spot check or spot test of a single tabulator as compared to all of the paper ballots cast that were put through that tabulator. And so I was present at that count as well, just a couple of days ago. And so I was in the my local district electoral office. I was present there. Um, the returning officer there had a hat with all the numbers for representing all of the tabulators used in my riding. There was 21 tabulators used in my riding, 21 numbers in the hat. I got to pick a number out of a hat. I think it was the number 8, and that was the tabulator that was selected for this spot check. So they got the report from that tabulator, which our scrutineers did observe and photograph on Saturday night. So I know it was the one that came out of that machine. All the machines have numbers, identifying numbers on them, so it could be tied to where it was and what particular box of ballots is associated with that. So all those paper ballots that were put through it on election night or advanced polls go into a little banker box essentially that gets sealed up on election night by EBC staff in front of scrutineers, gets sealed up, and that gets the associated tabulator number associated with it as well. So that was in the office for the spot check count. They cut that box open. It was a box full of these paper ballots that anybody who voted now knows what they look like. And the EBC staff took them out. There was about 850 something ballots in this particular that had been run through this particular tabulator. And 2 EBC staff sat there in front of myself and a scrutineer from the NDP, and we watched them hand count the entire lot one by one. And they're quite good at it too. They have ways to manage errors and things like that. So got through that count, and there was a 100% accordance between the paper ballots, the hand count, and the tabulator report, which was, of course, very reassuring. Now, there logically shouldn't really be any way for there to be any variation there. I mean, either those tabulators are going to reject a ballot, period, or they're going to count it. So if it's in that box, it should have been counted by that tabulator. There's not really any practical way there should be a variance there. And thankfully, in the case of my riding in particular, there was no variance. Now, some concerns I still have, and that's very good. It gives me some, obvious confidence that the machine, certainly in this case, was operating exactly as it was promised to operate. Now, the spot check only was done, of course, on one of the 21 tabulators in my riding. So
Right.
it would be possible that the other tabulators of the other 20 tabulators that weren't tested didn't operate faithfully. No one will ever know if they did or did not. There will never be any testing of that. And people, I think, defending these, and again, I'm really not trying to raise a stink about the election. I'm not trying to suggest there's any fraud that has taken place or any indication, any factors that would even suggest that fraud is taking place. And frankly, having watched the process, I would say it would be really difficult to influence our elections by trying to hack the back end of these machines because of these spot checks. There's going to be about 1 in 20 that are randomly checked, and they should produce 100% accordance with the paper ballot. So if you're going to try to influence this, you can't just have a program altering every tabulator, because it's going to get caught every single time. If you wanted to try to adjust the result, you would have to pick some random tabulators and hope that they didn't get caught, which is just not a very reliable method. I would think, if I was trying to influence the result of an election. Yeah, any process we're going to have relies to some extent on faithfulness of EBC staff, right? And their checks and balance. It's just by necessity, even the old method as well. And so, I mean, there's always chain of custody of ballot boxes and things like that. And that's going to be in any system we have, and that's there.
But there were scrutineers who watched the number come out and go into a box, and that number matched that machine. And later on, you drew a number in that machine. So theoretically,
yeah,
someone. Yeah.
Exactly. It is all verifiable.
Right. Okay.
That segment, that
Perfect.
section is verifiable. Yeah.
And I used to many moons ago work elections and count things by hand, and scrutineers were breathing down your neck. So now that you've seen that process, just in general terms, what do you believe is a better way for British Columbia to do their election? Is it the old school way, the new way, and why?
Old school way for sure. Absolutely. Because there's still vulnerabilities in the system. I think, and it's not so much the ability to effectively control the outcome. I don't think that would be really practical, quite frankly, for any entity to achieve. It would either be really piecemeal or it would be caught,
Mhm.
because you'd have the way. But it could be vulnerable to an agent that or an entity that didn't really care about the result, but wanted to just mess with us, make our
Mhm.
elections more expensive, like perhaps Russia right now. That's perhaps doing some cyber attacks on businesses and just making things a little bit more expensive here in
Mhm.
Canada, or costing businesses money.
Right, just
Um,
to
you know,
mess up the election in general. What
well,
about hacking? Like, is that what you're saying? Potentially it could be hacked or you're not sure. And then,
it absolutely could be. It absolutely could be. So I just want to explain. People are saying, "Oh, they're tabulators. That they're just simple tabulators," but that's an act of faith of sorts. EBC, Elections BC, is not verifying the software that's on those tabulators or on the data card
mm,
that goes into those tabulators. They take the manufacturer's word on that.
right.
So we don't know that they're tabulators. We are told it's kind of hearsay in a sense.
Mm,
Um, if they're going to keep using electronic tabulators, it would make sense to me that we could have sort of digital scrutineers. Certainly, that EBC should have a kind of digital scrutineer that gets an opportunity to just look at the software, look at the data structure on
yeah.
the card, and it
Mhm.
should could be done in front of scrutineers, digital scrutineers from the parties. Oh yeah, it really is a tabulator, guys. Here it is. Don't worry about it. But we're taking that on faith now. So if you could intercept the chain of custody of those data cards, you could theoretically put an alternative program on some of those data cards, or if you could intercept the machines. We don't know what software is on those machines. We're being told, and we say, cool, okay, great, great.
Mhm.
It's tabulator software. Thanks for letting me know, but we're not verifying that. EBC is
Right.
not verifying that. The parties have no way of verifying that. Joe and Jane Public have no way of verifying that, in fact, the software on either those machines or those cards is just tabulator software. It most likely is. It almost certainly is, but there's a vulnerability there if someone could intercept the chain of custody of the cards or the machines or infiltrate the manufacturer.
At Rebel News, we don't back down from bringing you the other side of the story, and I've been happy to do that when it comes to the matters of the election as well. You can keep up with my latest reports at bcdecides.com while we still wait. And if you appreciate the work that we brought you on this election, please consider chipping in a few bucks through the donation tab while you're there.